Imagine sinking so far into the ocean that sunlight becomes a myth. Pressure crushes steel like it's wrapping paper, and the world around you turns stranger than any sci-fi planet humans have ever dreamed up. Down past 20,000 feet, where giant invertebrates might stretch through the dark, where fish grow transparent heads, where underwater lakes ripple beneath actual water, where methane sleeps in icy cages, and where robots return home looking like they survived a fist fight with the planet itself. There are secrets we've barely begun to scrape. This is a realm that hides entire ecosystems evolving in total silence. Mysterious sounds that echo like messages from the abyss, and geological forces that rearrange the seafloor whenever they're in the mood. We know more about the moon than this place, and yet it's right here on Earth waiting. So buckle up, because we're heading into the hadal zone, where the ocean keeps its biggest mysteries, its boldest surprises, and its best poker face. If you ever wanted to know what it feels like to leave the world behind, forget space. Try sinking straight down past 20,000 feet into the ocean. At that depth, the water stops pretending to be friendly. Sunlight gives up somewhere around 600 feet. Darkness takes over by the time you hit 1,000. And everything below that feels like you're stepping into a cosmic elevator that only goes one direction, down. Past 20,000 feet, you enter a place humans were never invited to, a realm called the hadal zone, named after Hades, which tells you everything you need to know about how welcoming it is. Imagine leaning over the edge of a boat and dropping a pebble. By the time that pebble reaches this depth, the ocean has squeezed it with roughly the same pressure you'd feel if you balanced a small herd of elephants on your thumb. That pressure climbs past 16,000 pounds every square inch, no monster needed. The ocean itself is the monster. Down there, physics is not a suggestion. It's the boss. It decides what lives, what dies, and what gets stubborn enough to evolve into something that looks like a rejected creature from a science fiction movie. Most people think deep-sea exploration is glamorous, but the truth is, it's just a polite negotiation with an environment that would prefer you not be there. Every submersible creaks like an old wooden ship in a ghost story. Every bolt is a tiny warrior holding back an entire ocean that would love nothing more than to squish your high-tech machine into modern art. And the moment you cross that 20,000-foot threshold, the ocean becomes eerily quiet, as if it's watching you, as if it knows you're an intruder poking around in its private basement. The hadal zone is the kind of place that forces you to confront your insignificance. Creatures up here, humans, dolphins, YouTube science narrators, live in a cozy envelope of breathable air and warm light. Down there, life has to improvise. There's no sunlight, so no photosynthesis. There's barely any food, unless you count drifting flakes of dead stuff falling from the surface like the world's saddest snow. And yet, something lives down here. Many things, in fact. Hardy, slow, patient organisms built from evolutionary engineering that laughs in the face of pressure so intense it could fold metal like origami. But this chapter is not about the creatures, not yet. This chapter is about the feeling of entering a place so unexplored that it might as well be another planet. Less than 1% of the hadal zone has been directly observed. That means that the next time a submersible drops into a trench, it could be the first thing to illuminate that patch of ocean floor in the entire history of Earth. The first light ever. Think about that. The ocean floor has been here for billions of years, and only now are humans tapping on its door like, "Hey, mind if we take a peek?" And the ocean, being the ultimate introvert, replies by pushing back with 10 tons of pressure per square inch. As you descend, the water temperature drops until it hovers just above freezing. Not the refreshing kind of cold you brag about after a swim in the lake. The kind of cold that feels ancient, like it's been sitting there since Earth cooled. Your submersible's lights punch through the darkness in narrow beams, revealing nothing but floating particles that look like underwater dust motes. Every now and then something streaks past too fast to identify. Down here, the unknown isn't just common, it's the default setting. It's strangely peaceful, though. The surface world is full of noise, engines, voices, notifications, life. Down here, it's a silence so complete that even your brain gets embarrassed about making thoughts too loudly. If outer space makes us feel small because it's infinite, the deep ocean makes us feel small because it's intimate. It's a closed room with no air, a sealed vault of secrets. It's the universe's equivalent of a whisper. And as you sink past that 20,000-foot mark, there's a moment where you realize that you're not exploring the ocean. You're trespassing. You're stepping into a part of Earth that didn't evolve with humans in mind. You're not the protagonist down here. You're the visitor. You're the curious neighbor who wanders too close to the fence. But here's the thing. That feeling of trespass is exactly what makes it irresistible. The unknown is magnetic. The ocean isn't just hiding things. It's daring us to find them. And at 20,000 feet, as the world above becomes a distant memory, you get the sense that you're on the edge of discovering something extraordinary, something the ocean has kept tucked in its deepest pocket, waiting for the right moment or the right explorer to notice. And that is where our story begins. There is something oddly dramatic about the 20,000-foot mark in the ocean. It's not like the water suddenly changes color or a sign pops up that says, "Welcome to the danger zone. Please keep all limbs inside the submersible." It's more subtle than that. This depth represents a turning point where the rules of the surface world no longer apply. Scientifically, it's a boundary where physics becomes increasingly unforgiving. Biology starts to get really creative, and human technology begins to feel like it's trying to survive in an environment specifically designed to break its spirit. If you ever wanted to see the ocean express its personality, this is where it starts giving us the equivalent of a slow, unimpressed headshake. Let's begin with the pressure. At 20,000 feet, water presses down with about 10 tons per square inch. That means every inch of any object, from the hull of a submersible to the fingernail of some hypothetical diving superhero, is being squished with the enthusiasm of a world-sized hydraulic press. Pressure here isn't just high. It behaves like a force that's been waiting patiently for millions of years to show off. The deeper you go, the more water stacks above you, layer upon layer. each one adding its own weight, like a cosmic game of Jenga where you're the unlucky block at the bottom. For scientists, this makes the 20,000-foot mark an essential depth to study because it's where compression becomes so extreme that normal materials start acting in ways they weren't designed to. Metals can flex, bend, or crater. Plastics can warp. Electronics, if not sealed properly, experience what could best be described as the underwater version of stage fright. They simply stop performing. Even cables stiffen or snap under the strain. It's an environment that demands absolute precision, the kind where one miscalculation turns your multi-million-dollar research vehicle into slightly more expensive ocean confetti. And then there's the darkness. You might imagine the deep ocean's darkness as simply nighttime underwater. But that's like comparing a candlelit room to a cave sealed for 1,000 years. Below 20,000 feet, there is no hint of the sun, no ghost of a glow. Not even the faint memory of daylight. If light were trying to reach this depth, it would need a vacation afterward. The water absorbs every photon long before it gets close. This level of darkness is so complete that shining the brightest lights we have barely reveals more than a small bubble of visibility around a submersible. Imagine walking through a dark room with a flashlight, except the room is the size of a continent, and the flashlight is being held together by gentle optimism. Scientists are fascinated by this pure darkness because it allows them to observe how light interacts or doesn't interact with the deep ocean. It affects everything from how organisms evolve to how sensors detect motion. It even impacts how materials reflect, scatter, or fail to show up entirely. A lot of what we know about optics and vision has been tested in environments where light actually exists. Down here, those rules dissolve. It's a laboratory for understanding the absence of light. And that's a weirdly useful thing. But nothing tests our curiosity and our engineering more than trying to send machines into this environment. Submersibles must be built like armored knights with the personality of a submarine and the endurance of a mythological creature. Their hulls often resemble giant metal eggs, because that shape evenly distributes pressure. Flat surfaces are a luxury the hadal zone does not allow. Every connection point, hinge, sensor mount, and wire feed-through is a potential point of failure. The ocean at this depth has no favorites. Everything is equally crushable. Even propulsion becomes tricky. Water this deep is so dense that maneuvering feels like trying to swim through honey. Thrusters must be powerful enough to move, but delicate enough not to destroy sediment or disturb fragile environments. Energy consumption skyrockets. Batteries drain faster, and communication? A comedy in itself. Radio waves don't travel well through water, so submersibles rely on acoustic signals, which travel slower and distort easily. It's like trying to send a text message by shouting it through 50 miles of stone. And despite all of this, humans keep coming back, knocking on the metaphorical door of the abyss like persistent neighbors showing up to borrow sugar. The ocean, however, isn't impressed. Every time we send a vehicle down, the water looks at it the way a cat looks at a new toy. Mildly curious, mostly indifferent, ready to destroy it without warning. The deeper we go, the more the ocean seems to whisper, "Are you sure about this?" in a tone that can only be described as politely threatening. But this depth matters because it's a frontier of physics. It is the point where we can directly test theories about material science, pressure resistance, chemical behavior, and structural integrity. The hadal zone is the closest thing Earth has to an alien world right beneath our feet. Studying it expands our understanding of what technology can endure and what life can adapt to. And perhaps the best part? Each expedition pushes the boundary of what humans and machines can accomplish in an environment designed to deny progress with spectacular consistency. Down here, curiosity isn't just a trait, it's a challenge. And the ocean, with all its pressure, darkness, and stubborn refusal to make things easy, is the perfect opponent. Before advanced submersibles started descending into the abyss with robotic arms, titanium shells, and enough sensors to impress a spacecraft engineer, humanity's earliest attempts at exploring the deep ocean looked a lot like science fair projects that got wildly out of hand. These explorers were brave, brilliant, and occasionally a little bit unhinged, exactly the kind of people you need when the mission involves building a metal ball, sealing yourself inside it, and trusting it not to implode while sinking into the darkest, coldest waters on Earth. In the early 20th century, deep-sea research was less high-tech expedition and more, "let's hope this works." The ocean was mysterious, unmapped, and completely uncooperative. Scientists knew it was deep, but how deep was still up for debate. Back then, the idea of exploring beyond simple diving depths felt as radical as trying to poke the center of the earth with a very long stick. But this uncertainty didn't stop a handful of pioneers from trying. One of the most iconic early explorers was William Beebe, a biologist who in the 1930s decided he'd had enough of staring at surface creatures and wanted to meet the inhabitants of the deep himself. His vehicle, the bathysphere, was a spherical steel chamber that looked exactly like a giant cannonball with windows. It was lowered into the ocean by a cable so thick it resembled the kind of rope used to restrain mythological beasts. Beebe climbed inside with the confidence of a man who was either remarkably brave or very tired of life on land. The bathysphere had no propulsion, no lights other than what it brought down, and absolutely no emergency plan if anything went wrong. If the cable snapped, Beebe would have achieved the world record for fastest unscheduled descent into the unknown, followed by quietest permanent residence at the bottom. Yet he went anyway, reaching over 3,000 feet, a record at the time, and returning with descriptions of fantastical creatures nobody had seen before. In the world of deep-sea exploration, this was the equivalent of stepping onto the moon using a glorified elevator. Then came Auguste Piccard, a Swiss physicist, inventor, and all-around overachiever who looked at the bathysphere and decided it needed upgrades. Not small upgrades, massive ones. Piccard developed the bathyscaphe, a free-diving vessel that didn't rely on a cable, but instead used gasoline for buoyancy. Yes, gasoline. Because if there is anything that says cutting-edge science, it's floating on a giant tank of flammable liquid while descending into crushing darkness. Picard's bathyscaphe, first named FNRS-2, then later the more famous Trieste, was a bizarre-looking creation that resembled a submarine borrowed from a particularly whimsical dream. It had a large float filled with gasoline and a pressure sphere bolted underneath. The sphere itself was tiny, just big enough for two people to crouch inside like astronauts who forgot to pack elbow room. It was groundbreaking technology, but even then, the hadal zone, the deepest trenches, remained mostly out of reach. Early dives pushed deeper than ever before, but the ocean always had one more layer of difficulty waiting. Despite their limitations, these early explorers paved the way for everything that followed. What they lacked in hydraulics, robotics, and digital imaging, they made up for with sheer audacity. They didn't have sonar maps or accurate depth readings. Sometimes they didn't even have clear windows. They simply went down until they hit a point where logic, engineering, and common sense all started sending polite but urgent messages suggesting they turn around. Even when technology improved, the hadal zone remained intimidating. The deepest trench, the Mariana, plunged far beyond what early bathyscaphes could safely handle. For a long time, the ocean simply shrugged at human effort and kept its secrets tucked under layers of pressure that made old machinery groan like a pirate ship. But each expedition reached further, collecting data, setting records, and occasionally terrifying the people inside the submersibles, just enough to remind them why exploring the unknown is not for the faint of heart. And here's the humorous truth. Those early machines were tough, but they were also adorably primitive compared to modern tech. Today's deep-sea submersibles have titanium shells tested in pressure chambers, high-definition cameras that can see clearer in darkness than most humans can in daylight, and robotic arms that could probably perform surgery if they weren't busy poking giant sea cucumbers. Meanwhile, the bathysphere had bolts that were tightened by hand the morning of the dive. Trieste had control systems that looked like they were borrowed from a vintage tractor. And emergency exits? Absolutely not. The strategy was essentially, don't let anything go wrong. Despite these challenges, the courage of these early adventurers carved the path we now follow. They showed that the deep wasn't an unreachable void. It was a real place, filled with life, geology, and stories waiting to be uncovered. Their dives didn't reach 20,000 feet, and they barely grazed the outer edges of the trenches, but they proved something critical. The deepest parts of our planet weren't off limits forever. They were simply waiting for technology to catch up, and catch up it eventually did. Modern submersibles glide to extreme depths with the poise of metal whales, armed with sensors, thrusters, and computational power that would have made Beebe and Picard fall out of their chairs. But without those early explorers, those patient, daring people in steel spheres, the hadal zone might still be nothing more than a mysterious rumor beneath the waves. If the ocean had a collection of secret rooms locked behind heavy doors, The trenches would be the ones that creak the loudest when opened. They are long, narrow scars carved into the planet's crust, stretching for thousands of miles, as if the Earth itself occasionally gets dramatic and drags its fingernails across the seafloor. Each trench carries its own mood, its own quirks, and its own geological attitude. They're not simply holes in the ocean. They're entire landscapes hidden under miles of water, each with a personality complicated enough to make a psychologist sigh. To understand trenches, you first have to picture Earth behaving a bit like a jigsaw puzzle that never quite sits still. Its crust is made of shifting plates that move with the patience of a snail, but the persistence of a marathon runner. Sometimes these plates crash into each other, and sometimes one slides beneath another in a process called subduction. This is where trenches are born, formed by one plate diving into the mantle while the other rides over it like a surprisingly calm surfer. The result is a long, deep groove on the ocean floor where the edge of the descending plate bends downward. It's geological origami on a planetary scale. The deepest and most famous of these moody underwater corridors is the Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean. This trench is so profoundly deep, it makes Mount Everest look like a slightly ambitious speed bump. At its lowest point lies the Challenger Deep, a location that seems determined to break depth records simply out of spite. The Mariana Trench carries the vibe of a quiet, brooding basement that keeps to itself and collects secrets. It's stable, steady, and profoundly silent. If it had a personality, it would be the mysterious relative who shows up at family gatherings but never speaks, leaving everyone both impressed and mildly intimidated. But the Mariana Trench isn't the only deep player in the ocean. The world is stitched together with over 30 trenches, each with its own geological drama. The Tonga Trench, for instance, likes to compete for depth. Stretching like a long, jagged smile across the southwest Pacific, it dives nearly as deep as the Mariana, but carries a very different energy. The Tonga Trench is restless. It's located in one of the fastest subduction zones on Earth where plates move with surprising speed, causing quakes and rumblings that make the trench feel like the ocean's version of a teenager constantly reorganizing their room. Then there's the Kermadec Trench, a neighbor of Tonga, equally dramatic but with a geological flair for the theatrical. This trench isn't just deep, it's active. The seafloor around it is dotted with underwater volcanoes and hydrothermal vents that behave like tiny pressure cookers. If the Kermadec had a personality, it would be the friend who insists they're fine right before causing a scene at a dinner party. Scientists love this trench for the sheer amount of geological activity happening within it. Every moment is a chance to witness the Earth reheating itself from the inside. The Philippine Trench, sometimes called the Mindanao Trench, has its own brand of intensity. Unlike the slow, quiet sinking of the Mariana region, this trench is part of a region where multiple plates collide in ways that would confuse even seasoned geologists. It's the ocean's version of a crowded, chaotic basement where too many things are happening at once. Earthquakes, volcanic arcs, and shifting crustal boundaries, all bundled into a single location. The Philippine Trench doesn't just exist. It thrums with energy, shifting and reshaping itself with the enthusiasm of an over-caffeinated sculptor. Moving across the globe, the Peru-Chile Trench lines the western coast of South America. This trench is long, over 3,000 miles of depth, that hugs the continent like a shadow. It's also responsible for some of the most powerful earthquakes in recorded history. If the Mariana is a quiet introvert and Tonga is an excitable teen, the Peru-Chile Trench is the intense neighbor who wakes you up with loud banging sounds because they're fixing the foundation again. Scientists study this trench obsessively because it's a master class in tectonic tension, a place where geological forces reveal their raw power. Even the lesser-known trenches hold their own charm. The Java Trench stretches across the Indian Ocean with a personality that could best be described as quiet but constantly stressed. It's part of a complex subduction zone that regularly produces powerful seismic events. The Japan Trench, meanwhile, is a hot spot for studying plate movements because it shifts frequently and offers scientists a real-time laboratory for understanding how earthquakes begin deep beneath the ocean. If the trenches were characters in a story, Japan's would be the one taking meticulous notes while bracing for the next plot twist. As varied as these trenches are, they share a few features that make them uniquely compelling. Their steep walls form isolated environments where currents behave strangely, sediments pile up in unconventional ways, and water temperatures drop to near freezing. Many parts of trenches have never been visited by submersibles, let alone thoroughly mapped. The sheer scale of them makes exploration slow and difficult. The ocean doesn't provide convenient entry doors. It provides miles-long abyssal cracks and says, "Good luck." Yet their differences are what make them fascinating. Each trench captures a different moment in Earth's tectonic story. They are markers of ancient collisions, slow-motion crustal migrations, and geological reshaping that unfolds over millions of years. They show us that even though the ocean seems calm from the surface, the world beneath is constantly shifting, bending, breaking, and rebuilding itself. In a way, the trenches are Earth's emotional archive, each one a different expression of how the planet copes with pressure, movement, and time. And as we map them, explore them, and slowly piece together their histories, we begin to understand that these moody basement rooms are not simply features of the deep. They are the blueprints of a living planet, written in stone far below where sunlight dares to reach. If the deep trenches are Earth's secret rooms, then the microbial life hiding inside them are the mysterious roommates who leave no footprints, no noise, and absolutely no forwarding address. These organisms don't just survive conditions that would turn most life into a tragic smear on the seafloor. They thrive there, and they do it with such confidence that if microbes could wear capes, the hadal ones would let theirs drag dramatically behind them just to make a point. To understand why microbial life in these depths is so fascinating, picture what the environment demands. Temperatures hover just above freezing. The pressure is so intense it could flatten submarines that aren't built with nearly obsessive engineering precision. There's no light, so photosynthesis isn't just difficult, it's impossible. Food is practically non-existent, unless you're enthusiastic about digesting the slow drift of organic debris, minerals from rocks, or the occasional chemical plume that bursts out of unseen geological activity. In other words, conditions that make humans dramatically declare, "Nope," make certain microbes shrug and say, "Is that all?" These organisms are called extremophiles, which sounds like the name of a questionable action movie franchise, but actually refers to creatures that have evolved to thrive in environmental extremes. And the microbes at 20,000 feet aren't just extremophiles. They're overachievers. Some are barophiles, specialists in high pressure. Others are psychrophiles adapted to deep cold. Some are chemolithoautotrophs, a term that is far too long, but essentially means they can eat rocks. Yes, eat rocks. Somewhere along evolutionary history, these microbes looked at minerals and thought, delicious. Barophilic microbes in particular have become the subjects of intense scientific curiosity because they function normally at pressures that humans couldn't withstand for even a fraction of a second. Their cell structures are reinforced with unusual proteins and fats that stay flexible instead of collapsing. To put that in perspective, imagine being able to keep your bones from snapping and your organs from flattening simply by adjusting your biochemical wardrobe. If humans tried to face these pressures, we wouldn't just die, we'd disappear. Meanwhile, these microbes are down there living their best lives, metabolizing slowly, reproducing patiently, and treating the hadal zone like beachfront property. But their survival tricks go even further. Some hadal microbes rely on chemical energy sources from the seafloor itself. They use hydrogen, methane, sulfur, and iron the way plants use sunlight. That means they don't need a traditional food chain. They are the food chain. They build ecosystems in places where sunlight never arrives and where larger organisms depend on them for their first trickle of energy. In a way, they're the quiet stage crew of the deep ocean, never seen, rarely appreciated, but absolutely essential. There are also microbes that cling to rocks in trenches, living inside microscopic cracks where minerals dissolve slowly. These organisms may replicate at a glacial pace, some dividing only once every few years, but their patience is unmatched. When Earth shifts and new rocks form, these microbes hitchhike into new spaces like tiny nomads, expanding their microscopic territories. They're not fast, they're not flashy, but they are unstoppable in the most literal sense. Time doesn't intimidate them. They have geological patience. One of the most surprising discoveries is that hadal microbes often have unique enzymes that function under intense pressure. These enzymes help maintain cell structure and keep chemical reactions running smoothly. But here's the twist. The very pressures that would crush a human body actually help some of these enzymes work better. It's like they've negotiated a special deal with physics. Sure, squeeze me as much as you want, just don't mess with my biochemistry. For scientists studying potential life on other planets, these enzymes are a gold mine of information, offering clues about how life might emerge in extreme environments far from Earth. There's even evidence that some trench microbes may play a role in deep carbon cycling. They can absorb carbon compounds drifting down from above, or even transform inorganic carbon into organic forms. Think of them as very tiny accountants balancing planetary chemical budgets in absolute darkness. If they could send invoices to the rest of the biosphere, they'd probably charge extra for operating in conditions equivalent to living inside a giant pressure cooker. Despite their microscopic size, these organisms push scientific boundaries. They show us that life doesn't need sunlight, warmth, or a pleasant atmosphere. It only needs a way to make energy and a structure strong enough to resist being squashed like an unlucky grape. And because microbial life at these depths rarely interacts with the rest of the Earth's biosphere, it may have evolved along its own path for millions of years. That means hidden in the hadal sediment are potentially ancient lineages of microbes, tiny time capsules that record evolution in isolation. And if that's not impressive enough, consider the fact that when researchers retrieve sediment cores containing these microbes, many of them continue to function even when brought to the surface. After being dragged from unimaginable pressure into normal atmospheric conditions, they simply keep going. It's the microbial equivalent of stepping off a roller coaster and calmly asking what's for lunch. Exploring these organisms feels like discovering the secret notes life has been passing around behind our backs. They reveal what biology is capable of when pushed to its limits. They challenge our definitions of habitable environments. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that sometimes the most extraordinary life forms are the ones too small to see, quietly rewriting the rules of survival in a world that most of us can barely imagine. Somewhere far below the sunlit surface, past the fishing nets, past the wandering sharks, and past the depths where most submarines politely turn around, there may be creatures so large, so strange, and so gloriously squishy that they make every sea monster legend look like a children's bedtime story. If microbes are the unseen rulers of the hadal zone, then giant invertebrates are the potential celebrities, big, mysterious, and possibly the kind of beings that would glance at a passing submersible like, "You're in my living room." The idea of giant invertebrates lurking in the deep isn't just the product of overactive imaginations or late-night science fiction marathons. Deep-sea gigantism is a real and thoroughly fascinating biological trend. Certain creatures living at extreme depths grow to sizes that would make their shallow water cousins feel deeply insecure. For reasons scientists are still piecing together, pressure, temperature, oxygen availability, and the simple fact that nobody's down there telling them not to, some species just get enormous. Consider the giant squid. For centuries, sailors told stories about tentacled monsters capable of dragging entire ships underwater. People laughed, called them superstitions, and politely suggested sailors get more sleep. Then modern science eventually found out those sailors were sort of right. Giant squids are real, and while they don't sink ships, they do grow longer than school buses. Their arms are studded with suction cups lined with tiny hooks, like nature's version of industrial Velcro, and they navigate the deep with the stealth of a creature that has absolutely no reason to hurry. Invertebrate gigantism is not fiction. It is very much happening while we speak. But giant squid are only the poster children. They are the celebrities that got their 15 minutes of fame. The real question, the tantalizing one, is whether something even larger, stranger, and more creatively goo-based might be shuffling around near 20,000 feet. After all, the deepest zones of the ocean are nearly unexplored, and nature has a long history of designing creatures that defy expectations. Evolution, when given enough time and complete darkness, tends to get experimental. Scientists already know that certain deep-sea amphipods, basically oceanic crustacean nuggets, grow to several inches long, which is gigantic compared to their surface relatives. Some isopods, cousins of household pill bugs, reach the size of newborn puppies on the seafloor. These creatures don't look frightening, unless you fear large, armored, potato-shaped beings. But they show us something important. The deep ocean allows invertebrates to grow large without the constraints that limit animals near the surface. Pressure, surprisingly, doesn't stop them. Cold slows metabolism, which in turn slows life down to a crawl. In the deep, creatures don't chase prey often. They don't sprint. They drift, hover, and wait. It's a world where slow and steady isn't just a virtue. It's the only lifestyle available. A large, gelatinous invertebrate could thrive down there simply because nothing demands it waste energy. It could be centuries old. It could move inches per hour. It could have no natural predators because everything else down there is equally busy conserving calories. If you were a massive blob with a relaxed attitude, the hadal zone would be paradise. And so, the possibility emerges. What if there are giant jelly-like creatures we haven't seen yet? Something translucent, vaguely shaped, and casually floating through the deepest trenches, with the confidence of a creature that knows it will never be fast enough to chase a submersible anyway. Imagine a 15-foot slow-motion invertebrate drifting past the lights of an exploration robot, blinking, if blinking is a thing it does, and continuing on its way, possibly thinking, I really hope that metal bubble doesn't bump into me. Even more intriguing is the possibility of oversized cephalopods that have evolved for extreme depths beyond where giant squid typically roam. Maybe there's a species that took gigantism as a personal challenge, growing thicker, tougher flesh, or longer tentacles for sensing faint vibrations in the water. It might be a creature adapted for a world where food falls from above like surprise presents, and where a long reach could mean grabbing dinner before your neighbor does. Picture something the size of a house, but polite enough to move slowly so it doesn't accidentally smack into the walls of a trench. Then there's the comedic but not entirely impossible idea of giant worms. Tube worms have been discovered at astonishing sizes near hydrothermal vent systems in shallower deep-sea locations, thriving by using symbiotic bacteria for nutrition. While tube worms don't wander around wreaking gooey havoc, deeper trenches might harbor related species that reached even greater lengths. A worm the size of a fire hose, but softer, slower, and dramatically uninterested in surface life, could easily call the hadal sediment home. It wouldn't be dangerous unless you count making scientists scream with joy upon discovery. Science can't prove these unknown giants exist, but it also can't rule them out. The hadal zone is simply too vast, too unexplored, too dark, too deep, and too complex for us to assume we've cataloged everyone attending the underwater party. And nature loves surprises. Just when scientists think they've seen the full cast of ocean characters, a new creature appears with features nobody put on the script. So when people wonder whether something enormous might be hiding at 20,000 feet, the reasonable scientific answer is, it's possible, and honestly, knowing the ocean, it might just be doing it out of spite. Because if there is a place on Earth where a giant, slow, mischief-minded invertebrate could exist unnoticed for millennia, it's the very bottom of the trenches, where evolution has all the time in the world, plus complete privacy, to get as weird as it wants. Somewhere between the upper midnight zone and the sprawling depths of the trenches, fish begin to look less like the sleek swimmers we know and more like the results of a brainstorming session where evolution decided to ditch the rules and just have fun with it. Down near 20,000 feet, the ocean becomes a kind of biological laboratory where adaptation is less about survival of the fittest and more about survival of the weirdest. And the fish that live there, they are living proof that nature sometimes experiments with the enthusiasm of an artist who has just discovered a new box of crayons. One of the most iconic oddballs in these depths is the barrel-eye fish, a creature that looks like evolution drafted two designs, one for the body, one for the head, and then accidentally merged them during a moment of creative distraction. The barrel-eye is famous for its transparent skull dome, a gelatinous bubble through which you can see its glowing green eyes pointing upward like tiny periscopes. These eyes are not decorative. They're specialized for collecting the faint scraps of light that drift down from above. But instead of being positioned on the outside like normal eyes, they're tucked inside its head, protected by a clear shield that looks suspiciously like evolution was experimenting with prototype helmets. If fish held fashion shows, the barrel-eye would win most daring design every year. Its transparent casing allows it to rotate those upward-facing eyes forward when it needs to examine prey directly ahead. Imagine having your eyeballs mounted on gimbals inside your skull, swiveling like tiny telescopes whenever you sense food approaching. Up here on land, that would be alarming. Down there, it's just Tuesday. But the barrel-eye is only one example of the deep sea's eccentric creativity. Far below it swims the snailfish, a soft-bodied creature that looks like someone molded a fish from overcooked gelatin. Snailfish are astonishingly delicate. You could poke one too firmly, and it would probably file a complaint. Yet these fragile-looking beings have been found thriving at extreme depths where pressure would flatten more muscular species. Their bodies have almost no bones, no scales, and barely any structural rigidity, which turns out to be the perfect strategy when the water around you is trying to crush you like a misbehaving soda can. Instead of resisting pressure, snailfish embrace it. Their tissues are flexible, their bones reduced to faint suggestions, and their muscles are adapted to maintain function under incredible force. Where other animals might evolve thicker shells or sturdier skeletons, snailfish have taken the opposite route, becoming so soft and pressure-friendly that crushing forces simply have nothing to crush. It's a brilliant approach, albeit one that makes them look like they were designed during evolution's softer, more squishy phase. Then there are the tripod fish, so named because they prop themselves on three elongated fin rays like tiny underwater stilt walkers. Yes, these fish stand absolutely still on the seafloor, facing into the current like tiny statues waiting for food to drift into their mouths. Their eyes are reduced to vestigial bumps, because in the hadal dark world, eyesight becomes about as useful as sunglasses at midnight. Instead, their sense of touch is refined to an almost supernatural level. They detect vibrations in the water with sensitive fins and allow the current to deliver meals directly to them. If laziness were a deep-sea adaptation, tripod fish would be the reigning champions. Another deep-sea resident, the cusk eel, which is not actually an eel, has adapted with elongated bodies and delicate skulls designed to handle the pressure. Some species have evolved to use sound for communication in ways we barely understand. Their swim bladders act like resonating chambers, producing low-frequency noises that could travel surprising distances in the dense deep-sea waters. If you could listen in, the bottom of the ocean might resemble a slow-motion, moodier version of an underwater jazz lounge. And then there are the grenadiers, long, tapering fish that dominate some hadal environments. Their bodies are a combination of sturdy and stringy, tapering into thin, whip-like tails. Grenadiers seem to have evolved survival strategies centered around endurance. With slow metabolisms and specialized muscles that resist fatigue, they can swim continuously through the trench landscapes, using their large heads and sensitive barbels to detect food hidden in the sediment. They are the marathon runners of the abyss, albeit marathon runners with faces that look permanently surprised by their own existence. Perhaps the most amusing part of studying these deep-dwelling fish is imagining the moment when evolution decided to assemble each design. It's as though nature held a late-night brainstorming session where ideas flowed unchecked. What if we put the eyes inside the head? Brilliant, let's do it. What if this fish stands on stilts? Perfect, put it on the list. What if we remove the bones entirely? Even better, next. In the hadal zone, elegance is optional. Function is everything. A transparent head helps collect rare photons. A jelly-like body resists pressure. Oversized fins serve as both sensors and balance beams. Reduced vision saves energy. Strange proportions become advantages. Every fish is a product of physics, chemistry, and the unstoppable creativity of evolution working overtime. And all of this reinforces one truth. The fish living near 20,000 feet aren't just surviving. They're mastering their environment. They're proof that life does not retreat in the face of extremes. Instead, it reshapes itself, adopting new tools, new strategies, and occasionally a design choice that makes biologists raise an eyebrow. Down in the deep, fish don't follow the rules. They rewrite them. The bottom of the ocean is often imagined as a silent, motionless expanse, an untouched, sediment-covered landscape that hasn't changed since dinosaurs had strong opinions about who ruled the planet. But slip down far enough into the twisting corridors of the hadal trenches, and you find that the deep sea is far from still. In fact, it's one of the busiest, most restless places on Earth, full of shifting currents, subtle tremors, and underwater landslides that happen with the dramatic flair of a floor deciding, without warning, to flip itself over and redecorate. Down here, the seafloor has a personality, and that personality could best be described as occasionally unstable, but in an impressive way. To understand why hadal currents are so intriguing, you first have to picture the trenches not as flat sea floors, but as massive geological chasms. They're steep, jagged, and uneven, carved in long vertical arcs thousands of meters deep. Water doesn't simply sit in these trenches. It flows, funnels, and dives through them like a slow-motion river. But unlike the rapid, swirling currents near the surface, hadal currents move with the kind of patience usually reserved for glaciers. They glide along the trench walls, slip across the sediment-covered floors, and drift around geological obstacles in long looping paths. Some are driven by differences in temperature, others by density gradients, and still others by the topography itself, which forces water into complex patterns that even scientists find difficult to map. Studying these currents is a challenge because they're subtle. They don't produce dramatic waves or visible turbulence. Instead, they gently push sediment, redistribute nutrients, and affect how oxygen and chemicals circulate through these abyssal corridors. What makes them scientifically fascinating is how they interact with the narrow, twisting trenches. The steep walls create what researchers call channeling effects, basically forcing water to behave like it's moving through the world's most intimidating waterslide, slow but determined. A single shift in the trench's geometry, even something small like the collapse of a slope, can alter the entire circulation pattern for miles. The deep ocean takes sensitive to change to a new level. But if currents are the quiet rearrangers, underwater avalanches, also known as turbidity currents, are the loud, dramatic ones. These events are the deep sea equivalent of a mountain deciding it no longer likes where it stands and sliding downward in a spectacular rush of mud, rock, and sediment. And while it's tempting to picture this as a chaotic mess, underwater avalanches are surprisingly efficient. They can travel at speeds faster than you'd expect for something made of mud in total darkness, racing through trench corridors for hundreds of miles without slowing down. Imagine a landslide combined with a conveyor belt, all happening under miles of water in silence, so complete it's almost eerie. These turbidity currents can rearrange the seafloor in ways that would make an interior decorator weep with envy. One moment, a trench floor might have a smooth layout of finely layered sediment, and the next, the entire arrangement is swept away, replaced by fresh material delivered in a single, sweeping descent. The trench walls themselves can collapse from time to time, sending cascades of debris tumbling downward. It's not uncommon for sediment layers to be mixed so thoroughly that scientists examining them later have to piece together the geological history, like a puzzle missing several important pieces, with the ocean offering no apology whatsoever. What triggers these underwater avalanches? Plenty of things. Earthquakes are frequent culprits, common along subduction zones where trenches form, but even subtle shifts in sediment weight can tip off a collapse. Floods from rivers thousands of miles away can send heavy plumes of material down the continental slope, eventually triggering deep ocean slides. In some places, the trench floor settles under the constant accumulation of dust, organic debris, and microscopic shells. When all that weight reaches a breaking point, the slope simply gives up and lets gravity take over. And the hidden geological activity behind all of this is astonishing. The trenches may look calm, but they sit atop some of the most dynamic tectonic boundaries on Earth. Plates grind, push, and sink beneath one another, constantly reshaping the underlying landscape. These movements subtly warp the trench floors, creating cracks, ridges and slopes that could open, shift, or collapse at any time. The ocean floor, in essence, is always thinking about rearranging its furniture, sometimes gently, sometimes dramatically, occasionally with enough force to send waves of sediment rushing like an underwater avalanche. All this geological activity affects more than just the landscape. It shapes ecosystems. Some species prefer calm, stable sediment. Others thrive where fresh material constantly flows in. Deep-sea scavengers feast on whatever organic debris becomes suddenly unearthed during a slide, while burrowing creatures are sometimes forced to relocate when their homes become unexpectedly upside down. To the life down there, the environment is ever-changing, like living inside a house that randomly decides to rotate the bedroom with the kitchen. And then there's the role of these avalanches in creating underwater canyons and spreading sediments across vast distances. Some turbidity currents travel far enough to deposit layers on the open abyssal plains, creating geological fingerprints that stretch across entire ocean basins. A single deep-sea avalanche can shape terrain on a continental scale, silently rearranging the architecture of the seafloor. It's the kind of quiet power that reminds us the deep ocean doesn't need explosions or erupting volcanoes to make dramatic changes. It can do it with mud, pressure, and a gentle nudge from gravity. In the end, the hadal zone is a world in flux. Beneath crushing pressure and perpetual night, currents weave through trenches, sediments tumble from the walls, and the earth subtly adjusts its shape. The seafloor doesn't just exist. It participates. It morphs, shifts, and occasionally throws full-scale mud tantrums. Down here, even the landscape is alive with motion, shaping a world that's constantly rewriting itself in the dark. If you ever needed proof that the planet likes to keep receipts, you only have to look into the hadal trenches. These deep, narrow chasms don't just swallow water and pressure. They collect history, storing it in layers of sediment so thick and so chaotic that they resemble nature's most overstuffed junk drawers. You know the drawer, the one in the kitchen that holds old batteries, rubber bands, a screwdriver nobody remembers buying, and maybe a fossilized snack from the late 1990s. Trenches behave the same way, except instead of loose change and mystery crumbs, they're filled with the chemical and biological leftovers of millions of years of Earth's past. Sediment in the deep ocean doesn't simply settle in a calm, peaceful drizzle. It travels, tumbles, and piles up in ways that look almost theatrical. Every particle drifting down from the surface, dead plankton, fragments of shells, chemical traces, dust blown from deserts, soot from ancient fires, eventually reaches a resting place. And because trenches are the lowest points on the planet, gravity treats them like the ultimate storage bins. Once something falls in, it rarely makes its way back out. The hadal zone is a one-way ticket for debris, a place where sediment layers stack like pages in an endlessly rewritten book. What makes these layers so scientifically valuable is not just the sheer quantity of material they contain, but the chemical stories locked inside. Each thin band of mud, sand, or organic detritus carries clues about what Earth was doing at the time it settled. Volcanic ash layers record eruptions. Shifts in carbon levels reveal ancient climate swings. Traces of metals speak to changing ocean chemistry. Even tiny shells from organisms long extinct whisper tales of ecosystems that had their moment, thrived, and vanished before humans ever drew their first cave doodle. When researchers drill into the sediment of the deep trenches, they're essentially time-traveling, except instead of hopping into a sleek sci-fi machine, they use awkward-looking core samplers that pull up columns of mud taller than the scientists themselves. These cores contain layers representing thousands, sometimes millions, of years of uninterrupted deposition. Because trenches are so isolated, shielded by steep walls and fed by constant rain from above, they often preserve these layers far better than flatter parts of the ocean. There's no tidal scouring, no strong currents ripping through and mixing everything together. Trenches quietly store what falls into them like giant archives built from mud. One of the fascinating aspects of trench sediments is their ability to trap chemical signatures that would otherwise vanish. Nitrate, phosphate, trace metals, and compounds from decaying organisms all get locked away in the layers. Scientists can use these to reconstruct ancient ocean chemistry, track how atmospheric gases changed, or identify periods when Earth's climate jolted from warm to cold or back again. It's like the planet scribbled notes on Post-its and then swept them into its deepest drawer for safekeeping, where they stayed perfectly readable for millions of years. Some trenches even capture more dramatic stories. Earthquake deposits, for example, appear as thick, chaotic layers caused by sudden underwater landslides that swept vast stretches of material into the abyss in a geological instant. These layers provide evidence of quakes long before modern seismographs existed. By studying them, scientists can estimate how often large quakes happened and how powerful they were. It's the deep ocean's version of a disaster scrapbook, minus the glitter and captions. Then there are the organic clues, bits of decayed sea life, broken shells, ancient microbial remains, and drifting carbon-rich particles build up into thick blankets of biologically sourced sediment. Some of these organic molecules are stable enough to survive eons, and researchers use them to analyze how ecosystems rose and fell, how ocean productivity shifted, and how food webs adapted to environmental changes. If you think of the trench floor as a pantry, this is the shelf where nature stores all the leftovers, including the ones that nobody should eat, but everyone wants to study. The trenches also collect surprising materials that traveled absurd distances. Grains of dust from the Sahara Desert have been found in deep Pacific sediment. Soot particles from ancient fires and grasslands, volcanic glass from eruptions thousands of miles away, even microscopic meteorite fragments that rain through the atmosphere all eventually find their way into these abyssal catch-alls. Trenches don't discriminate. They take everything, pack it down, and store it with the enthusiasm of a collector who insists every item could be valuable someday. Because trenches lie at tectonic boundaries, Sediment can also record chemical hints of Earth's internal processes. When the descending plate heats and releases fluids, these fluids seep upward through cracks and faults, often depositing unusual metals or minerals into the sediment layers. It's like the mantle occasionally drops off a care package containing rare geological knickknacks. Scientists treasure these clues because they reveal how plates interact, how subduction zones evolve, and how deep Earth recycles itself. Of course, all this sediment buildup eventually becomes recycled too, just on a time scale that makes human history look like a fleeting blink. Plates continue to converge, dragging the accumulated layers downward into the mantle by a few centimeters each year. Sediment that once recorded ancient storms or vanished species slowly sinks deeper until heat and pressure eventually destroy the chemical signatures. But by the time that happens, modern scientists have often already extracted what they need, reading the records before they disappear into Earth's internal machinery. In the end, trenches are more than geological oddities. They're the planet's memory boxes, messy, overstuffed, but full of irreplaceable treasures. Each layer of sediment is a sentence in Earth's long, wordless autobiography, and every core sample is a chapter waiting to be interpreted. The deep sea keeps its secrets well, but in these muddy drawers at the bottom of the world, it also leaves behind clues, tiny reminders of a planet that's always changing, always recording, and always willing to store just one more thing. If there is one thing you learn after spending enough time listening to the deep ocean, it's that the sea is noisy. Not the friendly, relaxing kind of noise, like waves on a beach or a distant foghorn that makes you feel vaguely nautical. No, the deep ocean produces sounds so strange, so unexpected, and so acoustically confusing that scientists who study them have, on more than one occasion, stared at recordings with the same expression you'd give a cryptic voicemail from an unknown number, down thousands of feet where light disappears and pressure reigns supreme. The ocean speaks, and sometimes it speaks loudly enough that microphones hundreds of miles away ask, "What was that?" One of the most famous examples of these mysterious noises is the legendary bloop, a sound recorded in the late 1990s that caused an uproar among anyone with even a mild interest in the unknown. The bloop wasn't just loud. It was astonishingly loud, louder than anything scientists expected from known marine animals. Its upward frequency sweep suggested something biological, but its volume suggested something massive, something bigger than any creature we've ever confirmed exists. Cue decades of speculation, wild theories, and the collective scientific shrug that still echoes today. When the bloop first appeared in underwater hydrophone recordings, it sounded like a giant creature clearing its throat, as if the ocean itself had discovered allergies. People joked that it might be a sea monster announcing its presence. Others wondered if some unknown invertebrate the size of a skyscraper had flopped its tentacles too enthusiastically. For a while, the mystery hung in the scientific community like a damp fog. Analysts compared the frequency to that of marine animals, studied the waveform, and attempted to triangulate the source. The only thing they were certain of was that the sound traveled across an enormous distance, which meant whatever caused it had serious underwater lungs Eventually, the popular conclusion was that the bloop likely came from an ice-related event, giant slabs cracking or shifting in the Southern Ocean. But the charm of the bloop wasn't in the explanation. It was in the delicious moment before the explanation existed, the moment when humanity collectively wondered whether something enormous and unclassified had made its presence known. It was a reminder that the ocean may keep secrets, but occasionally it also blurts things out loud enough for everyone to hear. And the bloop is far from the only strange noise echoing through the abyss. The Deep Ocean Orchestra includes an entire catalog of acoustic oddities, each with a name that sounds like it could be a character in a children's book or a band performing at a particularly eccentric music festival. There's the whistle, the train, the upsweep, and the slowdown, each with their own distinctive patterns and personality quirks. The upsweep, for instance, is a long rising whoosh that repeats seasonally, sounding suspiciously like the ocean warming up its vocal cords. It's been recorded since the 1990s, and while some suspect volcanic activity or hydrothermal vents, no one has definitively pinned it down. It's as if the planet is humming contentedly to itself at the bottom of the sea. Then there's the whistle, a high, eerie tone that sweeps upward rapidly. It's too structured to be random noise, too unusual to be attributed to seismic activity, and too short-lived to give scientists much data to work with. Some think it might come from a type of underwater volcanic eruption. Others think Mother Earth simply needed to get someone's attention and opted for the underwater equivalent of a dog whistle. The train sound, true to its name, rumbles steadily like a distant locomotive, making its way across the ocean floor. There is something oddly comforting about it. If you ignore the fact that it is happening thousands of feet below the surface, where trains definitely should not be. Researchers suspect it comes from Antarctic ice shelves, rubbing or vibrating, but the deep sea doesn't offer confirmations. It just plays the sound and lets everyone upstairs wonder. These mysterious sounds are detected using sophisticated arrays of hydrophones, underwater microphones placed across the world's oceans. Originally developed for military use, these networks have become invaluable tools for scientists studying everything from whale migrations to seafloor geology. But hydrophones never discriminate. They record everything, including sounds they can't immediately categorize. The deep ocean does not give context, explanations, or footnotes. It simply sends vibrations into the water and leaves the interpretation to us. And while many of these acoustic puzzles probably originate from natural events like ice cracking, seafloor movement, or underwater volcanoes, the allure lies in not knowing right away. The abyss speaks a language that is still partly unfamiliar to us. Some sounds occur only once and never again, like the ocean clearing its throat and then pretending it didn't. Others repeat annually, acting like seasonal greetings from the bottom of the world. And every now and then, a brand new noise appears on the hydrophones, leaving researchers staring at the data with the same expression someone gets when their car makes a sound it decidedly should not. Humorously, if the ocean truly is trying to communicate, it might simply refuse to use an inside voice. It doesn't whisper. It doesn't say things politely. It bellows, groans, screeches, and hums with the confidence of a planet that knows it has existed far longer than the species trying to decipher its noises. There is a playful charm in imagining the deep sea as a moody giant occasionally shifting in its sleep, letting out grumbles and squeaks that travel for hundreds of miles. Each sound, explained or not, reminds us how much of the ocean remains uncharted and how much we still have to learn about the forces that shape it. The deep ocean doesn't hide only creatures in geology. It hides voices, whispers, roars, and strange acoustic signatures waiting to be decoded. And maybe somewhere down there, a fish with too much personality or an invertebrate with opinions is contributing a sound or two just to keep us guessing. After all, in a world where everything is dark and pressure never stops squeezing, why wouldn't the ocean occasionally make a little noise to entertain itself? If life on the surface has the sun as its guiding star, then life around deep hydrothermal vents has the planetary equivalent of choosing to live in a basement lit by flickering chemical lanterns. These creatures don't follow the usual rules. They don't photosynthesize, they don't chase beams of light, and they certainly don't organize their lives around sunny weather. Instead, they thrive around scorching vents on the ocean floor, vents that spew mineral-rich fluids heated by the molten heart of the planet. If the sun is the respectable parent of Earth's ecosystems, vents are the rebellious uncle who shows up unannounced and teaches microbes questionable survival tricks. Hydrothermal vents exist where tectonic plates pull apart or grind against each other, allowing seawater to seep deep into the crust. There, the water heats, mixes with minerals, and erupts back into the ocean like a chemical volcano. These vents come in many styles. Some belch dark plumes loaded with metal particles. Others release shimmering clear fluids that distort the water like a heat mirage. But regardless of their flare, vents create a phenomenon rare in nature, a place where heat and chemistry produce enough energy to support entire ecosystems without a single photon of sunlight. The phrase, "life finds a way," may sound cliché, but these communities practically shout it from the abyss. At moderate depths, vents already host bizarre creatures. Tube worms as tall as humans, clams the size of dinner plates, ghostly shrimp with thermal sensors on their backs. But in the deepest zones, near trenches where pressures soar and temperatures plummet just inches away from scalding vent fluid, there may be species even stranger, species that no camera has yet captured and no researcher has yet named. Picture organisms that have evolved in permanent blackness, right next to streams of water hot enough to melt lead, adapting not through fear, but through creativity. One possible inhabitant of these hadal vents is a type of extremophile that takes chemical metabolism to extremes. Instead of relying on oxygen, they may use sulfur, methane, hydrogen, or iron as energy sources, performing chemical gymnastics that would make surface organisms faint in confusion. These microbes, and possibly larger organisms that depend on them, live in a world where energy doesn't fall from above but gushes from below. If sunlight is too mainstream, these species are the deep-sea hipsters who proudly proclaim, "We were doing chemosynthesis before it was cool." Imagine, for instance, a worm-like creature that feeds entirely on bacteria coating the vent walls, grazing slowly across mineral chimneys like a vacuum cleaner designed by geology students. It might have a body reinforced with pressure-adapted proteins, a mouth adapted not for chewing but for scraping microbial mats, and a metabolism tuned to extract energy from sulfurous chemicals. Its environment would be pitch black except for the faint glow of its vent home. No light for vision, no need for eyes, just sensory organs tuned to vibrations, chemistry, and heat gradients. Or picture a crustacean relative, a distant cousin of shrimp, that can withstand both boiling jets and icy water in a single day's commute. It may cluster at the boundary where vent fluid meets frigid seawater, balancing its temperature needs with the same precision as someone standing near a bonfire while trying not to scorch their shoes. Its shell could be infused with minerals from the vent fluid, giving it a metallic sheen and possibly the attitude of a creature that considers itself stylish. There could also be entirely new forms of symbiosis. On shallower vents, giant tube worms rely on internal bacteria to process chemicals for food. But at hadal depths, this partnership might take on even stranger forms. Maybe fish or invertebrates host colonies of heat-loving bacteria in special chambers under their skin, using the microbes as personal energy generators. Maybe there are creatures whose bloodstream directly carries chemical fuels absorbed from the vents. Maybe some life forms have evolved to tolerate shifts in temperature that would destroy proteins in any other known organism. And then there's the possibility of mineral-based structures, organisms whose bodies incorporate elements like zinc, nickel, or manganese, harvested directly from vent deposits. Such creatures wouldn't just live on the seafloor. They would grow out of it, anchoring themselves in chemical fountains that would kill most forms of life instantly. These beings could be flexible, gelatinous, or stiff as stone depending on their needs, blurring the line between biology and geology in ways that challenge our definitions of what a creature even is. One of the most tantalizing aspects of hadal vent ecosystems is their potential isolation. Some vents may remain active for centuries, creating pockets of life that evolve independently from other deep-sea communities. Species here may share little resemblance to those living even a few hundred miles away. In evolutionary terms, each vent could be its own world, its own evolutionary experiment, its own chemical kingdom sealed away beneath crushing pressure and total darkness. If researchers ever manage to explore these deepest vents directly, they may uncover organisms that force textbooks into emergency revisions. Creatures whose enzymes operate at temperatures that shred normal proteins. Species whose cells remain stable under pressures that distort metal. Microbes whose metabolisms mimic those suspected on icy moons like Europa and Enceladus. Life that suggests the ingredients for habitability are far more varied than we ever imagined. And the most humorous part? These species, these chemical artisans, these heat juggers, these pressure-defying organisms are probably living their lives completely unaware that humans exist. They're not waiting to be discovered. They're not hiding. They're just ignoring sunlight in a way that would impress even the most committed teenager refusing to open their bedroom curtains. Down here, life doesn't just adapt. It redefines the rules. And somewhere near the hottest vents in the coldest depths, undiscovered creatures might be thriving right now, quietly writing their own story in a language made of chemistry, pressure, and heat. Beneath the crushing dark of the hadal world, where pressure squeezes everything with the dedication of a full-time job, and sunlight is nothing but an ancient rumor, the ocean hides places so bizarre that even seasoned scientists struggle to describe them without sounding like they're pitching a fantasy novel. These are the underwater lakes and brine pools, pockets of liquid so dense, so heavy, and so defiantly separate that entire ecosystems hover at their edges like partygoers trying to figure out whether they're allowed past the velvet rope. If the deep sea ever hosted a VIP club, brine pools would be the exclusive lounges where only the most chemically tolerant life forms get their names on the guest list. To understand these strange places, imagine being thousands of feet underwater and then discovering a lake beneath that water, a lake within the ocean, a body of liquid sitting on the seafloor that refuses to mix with the water above it. It looks like a shimmering oasis, rippling with its own waves, complete with shorelines and banks. Some even have miniature cliffs. This isn't poetic exaggeration. It's exactly what brine pools look like through a submersibles camera. Pilots often describe the eerie sensation of trying to descend through one, only to bounce off the surface, as if the ocean itself slapped their submarine and said, "Sorry, members only." These pools form when salt deposits buried beneath the seafloor dissolve and migrate upward through cracks. The resulting brine is so salty, it becomes denser than the seawater above it, settling into depressions like a liquid that simply refuses to mingle. In some places, these brine concentrations are several times saltier than regular seawater, dense enough that creatures swimming above them move with the awkward effort of someone wading through syrup. If normal ocean water is a refreshing drink, brine pools are the kind of beverage you only sip once before politely declining seconds. And yet, despite the inhospitable chemistry, life gathers at the edges of these pools in ways that have stunned researchers. Microbes cluster at the boundaries where fresh seawater meets hypersaline brine, zones called haloclines, feeding on chemical gradients like they're at a buffet of molecular opportunities. Some species thrive on methane bubbling up from beneath the pool, turning hydrocarbons into energy the way surface life uses carbohydrates. Others rely on sulfur compounds, or even the faint traces of metals dissolved in the brine. For these organisms, the brine pool's rim is the hottest party in the deep, dangerous, dramatic, and absolutely packed with microscopic thrill seekers. But the deepest trenches may hide a version of these pools we've barely begun to imagine. Down in the hadal zone, the pressure is so intense and the chemistry so bizarre that liquids could behave in ways almost never seen at shallower depths. Super-dense brines might form from different minerals entirely, not just salt, but metals and complex compounds squeezed out from subducting tectonic plates. These liquids could settle into trench depressions and create pools, unlike any found in mid-ocean ridges. the way an underground club might develop its own vibe, separate from the trendy venue upstairs. Some scientists even speculate that under extreme pressure, unique mixtures of salt, methane, ammonia, and metals could create stratified layers, underwater lakes within underwater lakes, each one denser than the layer above it. Picture a stack of mysterious liquids, each one waiting for the brave or foolish to descend. From a distance, a submersible might see distorted heat-shimmering surfaces, thin waves lapping against slopes, or patches of fluid so thick they seem almost gelatinous. The hadal floor might be hosting chemical landscapes that no camera has yet lingered long enough to catch. These brine pools also play with gravity in surprising ways. A dropped object might fall through the water column normally, hit the surface of the brine, then slow dramatically, sometimes floating, sometimes sinking slowly, sometimes landing like a rock dropped into pudding. Equipment lowered too close can corrode, overheat, or short-circuit because these pools aren't just salty, they're often charged with metals and reactive elements. For researchers, approaching a hadal brine pool is like approaching a mysterious container labeled "Do Not Touch," while simultaneously wanting very badly to touch it. And then there are the textures. The edges of brine pools are often lined with mats of microbes that form fuzzy carpets of living material. Some pools accumulate crystal crusts along their boundaries, salt formations, mineral blooms, or rock-like growths shaped by complex chemical interactions. In the hadal zone, where pressure alters how minerals dissolve and precipitate, these formations could take on shapes and densities unlike anything in shallower waters. Imagine terraces of shimmering mineral ledges cascading into a thick, dark lake, a landscape that would fit neatly into a fantasy painting, if not for the fact that it actually exists on Earth. The pools also hold geological secrets. Researchers suspect that some trenches may host slow-moving plumes of superdense fluid creeping along the floor, carrying dissolved chemicals that originated from deep within the crust. These plumes could fuel pockets of entirely unknown life, feeding organisms that evolved along chemical rules we haven't yet discovered. If life exists elsewhere in the universe, in subsurface oceans on icy moons, it might look a lot like whatever's lurking around these hadal brines. And of course, the humor in all this is unavoidable. The ocean, with all its vastness, seems to have crammed secret lounges at the bottom, places so exclusive that even most fish have no idea they exist. Here in the trenches, the deep sea isn't just dark and cold. It has style. It has chemistry. It has velvet-roped pools that reject submarines and welcome only the most chemically adventurous life forms. Somewhere down there, beneath miles of water and pressure that could flatten steel, the ocean keeps its most enigmatic hangouts hidden. Brine pools glowing faintly under the lights of passing robots, lakes that ripple with liquid denser than thought itself, and ecosystems that thrive where everything else would dissolve. In these quiet, shimmering pockets, Earth hides stories no one has read yet, stories written in salt, metals, and secret reservoirs of liquid darkness. If humans ever want to explore the hadal zone, the deepest, darkest, coldest corners of the ocean, we can't just strap on scuba gear and hope for the best. At 20,000 feet, a human would last approximately the length of a single, horrified thought before being compressed into something that could only be described as formerly three-dimensional. So naturally, we send robots. Brave, loyal, extraordinarily expensive robots. Robots that venture into an environment so intense it treats advanced engineering with the same courtesy a car crusher extends to a hatchback. Down in the trenches, pressure doesn't politely test machinery, it questions its life choices. Designing deep-sea robots for the hadal zone is like trying to build a phone that works inside a black hole. They must operate in perpetual darkness, steer through narrow geological canyons, withstand temperatures just above freezing, and remain cheerful under pressures powerful enough to collapse buildings. These machines are technological marvels, but the ocean does not care. The ocean has never cared. If anything, the trenches look at every new submersible and say, "Cute. Let's see how long that one lasts." The first challenge engineers face is pressure. Crushing, unrelenting pressure that climbs higher with every meter of descent. To survive it, robots are built with specialized materials like titanium alloys, syntactic foam, and ceramic housings. Syntactic foam, for instance, is a buoyant material packed with tiny glass spheres strong enough to resist being pulverized. It's the robot equivalent of wearing 30 layers of armor and hoping none of them buckle. But even with all that protection, everything remains one bad calculation away from becoming an expensive metal pancake. Cameras must be housed in pressure-resistant casings thicker than those on bank vaults. Lights require reinforced lenses that won't implode. Every bolt, every seal, every wire connector has to be engineered to perfection. A single flaw, a microscopic bubble in a weld, a screw not quite tightened, a cable that flexes too much, can lead to catastrophic failure. And catastrophic at the bottom of the ocean usually means gone, not fixable. Bringing a robot home in pieces is considered a lucky outcome. Then comes the issue of movement. Piloting a robot in the hadal zone feels less like steering a vehicle and more like trying to move a refrigerator through a swimming pool while wearing mittens. The water is dense. The terrain is unpredictable. The visibility is laughably bad. Engineers equip these robots with thrusters that can operate under enormous pressure, but even then, maneuvering must be slow and cautious. It's not a place for zooming or graceful arcs. It's a place for inching forward while praying the robot doesn't bump into anything sharp, loose, or unexpectedly alive. Navigation poses another headache. GPS signals do not reach the deep sea. Radio waves fade into nothingness. Even sound travels strangely at these depths, bending and reflecting off trench walls in ways that make acoustic signals resemble a chorus shouting in a cave. So robots often rely on inertial navigation, dead reckoning, sonar scans, and patience. Lots of patience. They build maps slowly, using sound to trace landscapes centimeter by centimeter. It's like trying to assemble a puzzle in the dark using only your sense of touch and the faint hum of your own anxiety. And then there's the issue of communication. Talking to a hadal robot is a bit like texting someone through 10,000 miles of wet cement, and data rates are glacially slow. Commands may take several seconds to reach the robot, and its responses trickle back with the speed of a sleepy sloth. Sometimes the robot loses connection entirely, prompting operators to stare nervously at screens and whisper encouragement as though machines respond to pep talks. They don't, but scientists do it anyway. Power is another complication. Batteries must last hours or even days, all while being sealed inside pressure-proof housings that trap heat, and heat is the enemy. Electronics generate warmth, but there is no easy way to cool them inside a sealed sphere surrounded by near-freezing water. If the insulation fails, the robot overheats. If the insulation succeeds too well, the robot freezes. It's a delicate balance, like trying to wear the perfect number of sweaters in a walk-in freezer while doing bicep curls. Deep-sea robots also need robotic arms, sampling tools, suction devices, and sensors strong enough to operate under pressure, but sensitive enough to pick up delicate biological or chemical samples. Designing a claw that can gently lift a fragile organism while also surviving pressures that could crush steel is about as easy as asking a gorilla to handle antique crystal. And yet engineers somehow make it work. Even once the robot is built, tested, and deployed, the hadal zone still has one last challenge: unpredictability. Trenches shift, currents change, sediment clouds form out of nowhere and reduce visibility to zero. Robots may get caught in silt, wedged between rocks, or smacked by debris tumbling from a slope. In some cases, venting fluids or dense brine pools interfere with electronics, creating pockets where sensors glitch or shut down entirely. A robot entering one of these zones might suddenly act like a confused tourist, spinning in circles and sending data that looks like abstract art. Yet despite all these struggles, deep-sea robotics keeps advancing. Engineers refine pressure housings, thrusters get more efficient, sensors become smarter. Each generation of machines goes a little deeper, stays a little longer, gathers a little more data. And every time one returns to the surface intact, scientists celebrate like parents whose child survived their first roller coaster. The truth is, the hadal zone may treat robots like aluminum cans with inflated ambitions, but humanity keeps trying because the rewards are enormous. Every successful dive uncovers new species, new geological features, new clues about Earth's history. Every failure teaches engineers how to make the next machine stronger, smarter, and more stubborn. Deep-sea robots may be crushed, dented, scrambled, or lost, but they continue to push the boundaries of what machines and humans can do. And as long as there are trenches left unexplored, we'll keep building these determined little soda cans with dreams, sending them into the abyss to learn what waits in the darkest places on Earth. If the planet had a diary, the kind filled with secrets scribbled in the margins and emotional entries spanning millions of years, it would be tucked away in the hadal zone. Down where the pressure is spectacularly unfriendly and sunlight has never once RSVP'd, carbon and methane drift, settle, transform, and sometimes hide in ways that would make any detective proud. The deep ocean doesn't just store greenhouse gases, it manages them, tucks them away, reshapes them, and occasionally treats them like unfinished business. Understanding how carbon and methane behave at these depths isn't just an academic exercise. It's like reading the parts of Earth's diary the surface never gets to see. Carbon in the hadal zone doesn't follow the same rules it does in shallower waters. Up near the surface, carbon moves through the predictable rhythm of photosynthesis, respiration, decay, and ocean-atmosphere exchange. It's a busy cycle, energetic, visible, almost theatrical. But once carbon sinks past the reach of light, past the lively mid-depths, past the silent plains of the abyss, it enters the trenches where the rules change dramatically. In the hadal zone, carbon begins a slow, almost meditative existence, influenced by crushing pressure, freezing temperatures, and a lack of biological hustle. Most of the carbon that reaches these depths comes down as marine snow, the planet's most polite term for drifting specks of dead organisms, mucus, fecal pellets, and assorted microscopic leftovers. By the time this material reaches the trenches, it has been partly consumed, partly altered, and partly compressed into fine particles that settle into long-lasting deposits. Here in the hadal mud, carbon can be buried and preserved for centuries, even millennia, depending on how quickly new sediment piles on top. If the upper ocean is fast-paced and attention-seeking, the trenches are where carbon goes to decompress, quite literally, and take extremely long naps. One of the most fascinating behaviors of carbon at extreme depth is how pressure influences chemical reactions. High pressure alters the solubility of gases and affects how carbon-based compounds break down. Microbial activity slows dramatically, meaning organic matter decomposes at a glacial pace. Instead of rapid decay, carbon lingers. It marinates. It becomes part of the geological archive. It's as though carbon descends into the trenches and decides, yes, this is a good place to retire. But methane, the wild sibling in Earth's chemical family, acts even more strangely. Methane is produced in deep sediments by microbes that use unusual chemical pathways, ones that wouldn't stand a chance in the sunny world above. These microbes take carbon compounds and reshape them into methane through a metabolic process that works exceptionally well in dark, cold, pressure-heavy environments. If methane were a character in this planetary diary, it would be the one writing mysterious notes in the margins in handwriting no one recognizes. Some methane is locked away in the form of methane hydrates, icy crystals that trap methane molecules inside cages of water. These hydrates form under specific combinations of temperature and pressure, which the hadal zone has in abundance. Packs of methane hydrates sit in trench sediments like boxes of fireworks stored in a freezer, stable, contained, but holding enormous potential energy. They don't explode, of course, but conditions can shift just enough to release the gas in subtle bursts, sending plumes of methane rising like invisible smoke signals. But unlike in shallower waters where methane might quickly escape to the atmosphere, the hadal zone works differently. Methane released at these depths often dissolves into the surrounding water or becomes food for methane-eating microbes. These microbes act like chemical custodians, scrubbing the methane before it escapes further upward. In this way, trenches act as both sources and sinks, slowly producing methane while simultaneously training entire communities of organisms to consume it. And here's where the diary metaphor becomes even more appropriate. The deep ocean documents climate events in the way methane is stored or released. Periods of higher productivity at the surface can send more organic carbon drifting downward, which eventually increases methane production in trench sediments. Geological shifts at tectonic boundaries may cause bursts of methane to escape, leaving chemical signatures behind. These changes stack up in layers of mud, like dated entries describing episodes of global warmth, cooling, volcanic upheaval, or long-forgotten perturbations in Earth's climate. Even the ratio of different methane isotopes in these sediments can reveal whether it came from biological activity or thermal processes deep within the crust. Researchers can read these isotopic patterns the way historians read handwriting styles, each variation tied to a particular time, a particular process, a particular version of Earth. And pressure has another trick up its sleeve. It changes how methane mixes with water, how long it lingers, and how microbes use it. This creates microhabitats within the trenches where methane forms gradients, chemical slopes that shape entire ecosystems. Some microbes specialize in consuming methane in oxygen-rich conditions. Others thrive in oxygen-poor zones, using strange chemical reactions that make biochemists take long contemplative walks. The hadal zone supports a mosaic of methane-related processes, all stacked tightly against each other like chapters in a book. Yet, through all this chemical drama, the hadal zone may actually be playing the role of stabilizer in Earth's climate story by storing carbon in sediments and hosting microbes that break down methane. The trenches help prevent large amounts of greenhouse gases from escaping into the atmosphere. In their quiet, crushing, pitch-black way, trenches may be acting as Earth's hidden moderators, quietly absorbing excess carbon and methane, like a friend who listens to your late-night emotional spirals and keeps the secrets forever. And while much of this behavior remains mysterious, one thing is certain. The deep ocean knows far more about the planet's past climate than we do. It has lived through every glacial shift, every warm period, every atmospheric fluctuation. The trenches have recorded it all in chemical ink, buried in sediments under miles of water and pressure. Someday, as researchers uncover more of these chemical stories, we may finally understand what the ocean has been writing in its diary all this time. Stories of carbon, methane, pressure, patience, and the steady hands of a planet always keeping track of itself. If you were suddenly transported to 20,000 feet below the ocean's surface, ignoring the minor detail that you would immediately become a cautionary tale, you would discover a sensory world so bizarre, so thoroughly incompatible with our everyday experience, that it would feel as if you'd landed on a planet designed by an imaginative but slightly chaotic engineer. Down here, sound doesn't behave the way it should, light doesn't behave at all, and heat travels in ways that make thermodynamics look like it's experimenting with interpretive dance. The hadal zone isn't just dark and deep. It's a sensory dimension where Earth's basic rules show up wearing disguises. Let's start with sound. In the deep ocean, sound waves behave like they just graduated from an elite finishing school. They travel farther, straighter, and with an air of confidence rarely seen on the surface. Water is already an excellent conductor of sound, but at these depths, high pressure packs the molecules so tightly that sound can zip through them with astonishing efficiency. A small noise, a crack, a clink, a distant rumble can travel miles. To a hydrophone placed in the right spot, the ocean floor is a listening chamber where even subtle motions resonate like whispers in a cathedral. But there's a twist. While sound travels fast and far, it also bends. Differences in temperature, pressure, and salinity create layers in the water that refract sound waves, bending them up, down, sideways, and occasionally in ways that confuse even the most advanced sonar. A whale call from miles away may sound like it's coming from behind you, above you, or somewhere impossible. At 20,000 feet, acoustic signals don't follow straight lines. They follow the whims of physics. To a robot or submersible navigating the trenches, the soundscape is a maze of echoes and misdirection, like trying to find a single voice in a canyon where everything echoes twice just to show off. Light, on the other hand, doesn't move here at all. It never arrives. Not a single photon from the sun survives the descent into these depths. If the upper ocean is a bright living room and the mid-depths are a dim hallway, the hadal zone is the kind of darkness that swallows even imagination. It is absolute, pure, ancient blackness. A darkness so complete it doesn't feel like an absence of light, but rather a substance in its own right. This darkness creates psychological illusions in explorers. Submersible pilots describe moments when the world outside the viewport feels like a blank sheet, waiting for reality to be drawn on. The headlights of a vehicle cut through only a few meters before dissolving into nothingness. It's not that the light fades gradually. It simply vanishes, like it's been muted by the water. Particles floating in front of the camera appear suddenly, unexpectedly, as though the ocean reveals only 1 inch of truth at a time. Yet even in this void, the absence of sunlight does not mean the absence of illumination entirely. Some deep animals, relying on bioluminescence, produce their own light. But at 20,000 feet, even that grows rare. Creatures become stingy with their glow, conserving energy in the same way you might conserve battery on a phone down to 1%. Most organisms here rely on touch, chemical gradients and vibrations, not sight. If an alien civilization visited Earth and went straight to the trenches, they would likely conclude that eyes are an optional evolutionary accessory, not a fundamental one. Heat provides another bizarre twist. On the surface, heat rises, disperses, and mixes with ease. But in the trenches, Heat behaves like a guest at a party who doesn't know where to stand. The water at 20,000 feet is near freezing, just above 0 degrees Celsius, because cold, dense water formed at the poles sinks and slowly creeps into every corner of the deep. This coldness forms a blanket that drapes itself over the trenches, keeping them icy and stable for centuries. Yet not all heat behaves politely. In spots where geological activity creeps close to the sea floor, near deep faults, crustal fractures, or the faint signatures of vents, heat leaks out in tiny, unpredictable pulses. These pulses don't spread evenly. Instead, they create thin layers or plumes of warmer water that drift upward sluggishly before cooling and settling back down. If heat had a personality here, it would be indecisive, wandering around the trench like it got lost and refuses to ask for directions. One of the strangest consequences of this environment is how sharply temperature can change within inches. Near areas of subtle geological heating, you might find temperatures shifting from freezing to warm enough to shock biological tissues, but only across a distance small enough to fit inside a coffee cup. These microclimates are invisible to cameras, detectable only by sensitive instruments or startled microorganisms. For any hypothetical creature moving through this landscape, it would feel like walking through pockets of warm and cold air in a haunted house. The difference is just that the house could crush steel. All these sensory oddities combine to create an environment that feels profoundly alien. Sound flows like a supernatural river. Light doesn't exist, and heat sneaks around like a shy intruder. Biological senses that dominate life at the surface, sight, color perception, visual cues, are useless here. Instead, life navigates by feeling pressure changes, tasting chemicals drifting in currents, and detecting vibrations so faint a human would never notice them. In a very real sense, the hadal zone is the closest Earth comes to hosting an extraterrestrial environment. If explorers ever find life in the oceans of Europa or beneath the ice crust of Enceladus, it will live under conditions much like these. The deep trenches are a training ground for understanding alien worlds, not because of distance or exotic chemistry, but because they twist the familiar rules of physics into shapes that challenge our senses and our assumptions. Down here at the bottom of the world, sound travels like gossip, light retires early, and heat wanders the halls undecided. The result is a world that defies intuition, a world that exists within our own planet, but belongs to an entirely different realm of experience. If evolution ever wanted a place to run secret experiments without anyone watching, it chose the deep trenches. These hidden pockets of the world, cut off by pressure, darkness, and geography, operate like biological vaults, preserving lineages and lifestyles that may have branched off millions of years ago and never bothered to check back in. The hadal zone is one of the most extreme forms of isolation on Earth. And with isolation comes opportunity, the chance for life to evolve quietly, oddly, and independently. The same way a reality show might continue filming season after season, even though nobody remembers how it started. to understand why these ecosystems are so mysterious. Imagine a world where communication with the outside is almost non-existent. Nutrients arrive only in slow drizzles, carried by trickling currents or delivered through sediment falls. Temperatures remain stable and cold. There is no sunlight, no seasonal traffic, no migrations from above. Life here exists in small, scattered pockets, low-energy communities living on scraps of chemical reactions, drifting particles, and whatever else gravity happens to drop off. If the rest of the ocean is a bustling city, the trenches are secluded mountain villages reachable only by a single road that occasionally collapses. These villages of life often form around physical structures unique to trenches: steep slopes, narrow valley floors, isolated basins, and faulted walls. Such features create microhabitats, where conditions differ dramatically from what's happening even a few meters away. Slight changes in pressure, sediment texture, chemical concentrations, or water movement can divide communities into small enclaves where species evolve separately for generations without mixing. Over time, genetic divergence takes hold, shaping organisms that bear the mark of local conditions, the biological equivalent of accents so thick even nearby populations struggle to understand one another. And these isolated ecosystems may host life unlike anything we've documented. While the shallow oceans are full of species constantly crossing paths, competing, migrating, and reproducing in massive numbers, the hadal zone fosters small populations with limited dispersal. Under such constraints, evolution behaves differently. It becomes incremental, curious, experimental. A slight mutation that helps an organism extract energy more efficiently in mud might become entrenched in that population. A creature that tolerates colder water or richer sediment may settle into a niche no other species reaches. Over thousands of years, even minor variations can cumulatively produce organisms that appear oddly specialized or unexpectedly unique. Some scientists suspect that entirely new phyla, or at least extreme variants of existing ones, could be hiding in these environments. Consider the possibility of a worm species that has spent so long in a particular trench that its physiology reflects local chemistry. Altered metabolic pathways, novel structural proteins, sensory organs tuned to specific vibrations in that trench's currents. Or imagine micro-ecosystems living within the sediment itself. Tiny worlds where bacteria, archaea, and single-celled predators form compact food webs playing out dramas invisible to the naked eye. If these microbes have been isolated long enough, their genetic machinery might include adaptations we've never seen, performing biochemical tricks, honed in a world with no sunlight and crushing stillness. Even the animals we already know from shallower deep-sea regions might have hidden cousins in trench-specific enclaves. Consider amphipods, small crustaceans found in extraordinarily deep waters. The ones retrieved from trenches often show distinct differences from those living only a few hundred miles away, but at shallower depths. It's as though each trench hands out a personalized script, and the amphipods adapt accordingly. some developing unique pigmentation or the total loss of it, others evolving specialized mouthparts or different survival behaviors. What appears uniform at first glance becomes a patchwork of isolated evolutionary stories. What makes these hidden ecosystems even more intriguing is that they may persist across geological timescales. Trenches shift over millions of years, but many remain active long enough for life to adapt intimately to their contours. During these immense spans of time, surface events, ice ages, mass extinctions, climate shifts may barely touch these deep refuges. If a catastrophic event wiped out diverse species above, the trenches might quietly continue their own ecological dramas, granting some degree of insulation from global upheaval. This raises the tantalizing idea that trenches could harbor living fossils, not in the sense of ancient species preserved in form, but in the sense of ancient lineages preserved in isolation. These organisms may not look like anything from the fossil record. Pressure, cold, and darkness force every creature to adapt, but their evolutionary paths may trace back to epochs when the world above was almost unrecognizable. The hadal zone is a biological time capsule that doesn't preserve bones, it preserves possibilities. Exploring such ecosystems is extraordinarily difficult. Robotics struggle with maneuverability. Sampling equipment often disturbs delicate habitats, and even when specimens are collected, the journey to the surface sometimes damages their fragile tissues. Many deep organisms cannot survive decompression, forcing scientists to rely on fleeting glimpses and remote imaging. It's like trying to study an endangered species by viewing blurry paparazzi photos taken through thick curtains. Yet even these limited observations suggest that the hadal zone is not barren. It is selective, sparse, and patient, but not empty. Life takes advantage of even the smallest opportunity. A pocket of nutrient-rich mud, a slope that gathers organic debris, a crack where chemical gradients form. And because these opportunities differ from trench to trench, the organisms that exploit them evolve separately, becoming actors in isolated, long-running dramas we've barely begun to understand. In a sense, the trenches host Earth's quietest, most exclusive evolutionary experiments. The audience is absent. The lights are off. The cast is patient. And the script, still unfolding in slow motion, shows that even in the harshest corners of the planet, life thrives in secret, writing its story where no one is watching. If there is one fact that perfectly captures humanity's priorities, it's this. We have mapped the moon, an object 240,000 miles away, more thoroughly than the ocean floor sitting right beneath our feet. The moon, a place with no air, no water, no crowds, and only one flag. Meanwhile, the deep ocean, teeming with secrets, bursting with unknown life, and currently hosting a pressure system capable of flattening a car into a bookmark, remains so poorly charted that large sections might as well be labeled "Here be guesses." If the ocean floor had a social media profile, its status would be set to mysterious and untagged. The hadal zone in particular is spectacularly unmapped. Less than 20% of the ocean floor has been imaged in high detail, and trenches make up only a fraction of that. It's not that scientists don't want to map it. It's just that mapping the deepest parts of Earth is like trying to take a clear photograph of the bottom of a moving well using a camera attached to a very long string. Everything conspires against you: darkness, pressure, distance, physics, and the occasional crab that decides your equipment looks biteable. The real challenge begins with depth. 20,000 feet of water is more than enough to absorb radio signals, distort acoustic pulses, and generally sabotage your attempts at communication. Satellites can scan the moon's surface using lasers and direct imaging, but try pointing a laser at the hadal trenches, and the ocean simply says, "Nope," swallowing the beam faster than you can say, "Did the equipment even turn on?" So instead of direct line-of-sight mapping, scientists rely on sonar, sound waves sent downward from ships to bounce off the seafloor. It works, but the resolution is limited, the process is slow, and you must politely request that the waves, weather, and sea creatures don't interfere. Even with modern multi-beam sonar, the resolution of deep ocean maps is often measured in hundreds of meters per pixel. That means you could hide an entire skyscraper down there, and the map would record it as a bump. If you placed a small town at the bottom of a trench, it would appear on sonar as slightly lumpier sediment. Meanwhile, we have lunar maps with such fine detail you can point out individual boulders and landing footprints. The moon may be lifeless, but at least it sits still and doesn't get in your way. The second challenge is time. Mapping the seafloor with sonar requires ships to travel slowly, very slowly, back and forth across wide areas in what is essentially the least glamorous mowing activity on Earth. These ships must cover thousands of miles, scanning stripe after stripe of ocean floor. Every trench is long, narrow, and deep, requiring multiple passes from different angles to avoid missing features hidden by steep topography. It's like ironing the world's largest crumpled bedsheet using a hairdryer that only works if you move it at the speed of a relaxed snail. Then there's the issue of cost. Deep sea exploration is expensive, extremely expensive. Research vessels cost tens of thousands of dollars per day to operate. Submersibles are even worse, with some costing millions per dive. Considering that trenches span thousands of kilometers, mapping them thoroughly would require months of ship time and a budget large enough to make accountants weep. So instead we map a little here, a little there, patch some areas together, and accept that most of the hadal zone remains a giant, shadowy question mark on our planetary map. And despite all that effort, the ocean still finds ways to mock us. Instruments fail, weather intervenes, currents distort sound waves. In some trenches, the walls are so steep that sonar signals bounce around like confused echoes in a canyon. The mapping system returns data that looks less like a clear seafloor image and more like abstract art. Analysts stare at the noisy results and wonder whether they've discovered a new geological feature or accidentally scanned a rogue school of fish behaving in suspiciously geometric ways. What we have mapped so far tells us that the seafloor is far more dramatic than early scientists assumed. There are cliffs taller than skyscrapers, ridges sharper than mountain spines, and sediment dunes sculpted by currents no human has ever directly observed. But because our maps are incomplete, many of these features appear as hints, intriguing shapes, abrupt shadows, or mysterious pits that demand closer inspection. These are the cartographic equivalent of teaser trailers for documentaries that haven't been filmed yet. And then there are the unmapped regions, vast stretches of ocean floor that remain blank on our charts. If you zoom into certain areas on ocean mapping databases, you will literally find blue rectangles with nothing in them, as if someone forgot to finish the world. It's one of the rare moments when digital maps break character and openly admit, we don't know what's down there, please check back later. This lack of mapping has real scientific implications. Without detailed seafloor maps, we struggle to understand geological hazards, like underwater landslides or earthquake-prone faults. We miss potential habitats, possible vent systems, and unknown ecosystems. We lose track of how sediments move, how trenches reshape themselves, and how deep life spreads across the planet. The hadal zone holds vast scientific treasures. We just haven't found the storage closets yet. Yet this mystery is also part of the hadal zone's charm. The fact that we know more about a lifeless celestial body than the living earth beneath us is both humbling and exhilarating. It means that discovery is still possible, not in a metaphorical sense, but in a literal one. New maps will reveal new landscapes. New landscapes will reveal new creatures. And every unknown trench may hold surprises waiting patiently for the day our sonar beams finally reach them. Until then, the ocean floor remains Earth's most enigmatic frontier, a place where blank spaces on the map still exist, quietly challenging us. It's a reminder that even in the 21st century, our home planet still holds secrets the size of mountain ranges, waiting in the dark for someone curious enough to shine sound waves into the abyss. If our journey into the hadal zone has shown anything, it's that the ocean is an expert at withholding information. It doesn't drop hints, it doesn't offer previews, it doesn't leak spoilers like some talkative planets might. Instead, it sits calmly beneath 7 miles of water, expressionless, serene, and utterly unreadable, like a cosmic card player whose poker face could win tournaments across multiple galaxies. And yet, despite this impenetrable calm, we can't help imagining what discoveries might lie ahead. The deep ocean is vast, it is ancient, and it is full of secrets that humanity has barely begun to uncover. Picture the not-so-distant future. Research vessels cruising into remote regions, equipped with sensors so advanced they make today's technology look like stone tools. Autonomous submersibles, sleek, quiet, persistent, slipping down trench walls. mapping every crevice with the precision of a meticulous sculptor. These robots won't blink when visibility drops to zero. They won't panic when pressure climbs. They will glide through the dark like patient explorers, unhurried by time and untroubled by fear, ready to reveal landscapes no human eye has ever seen. And what will we find down there? Perhaps towering mineral pillars grown in pitch-black isolation, stacked in formations that look eerily deliberate. Perhaps sediment plains marked with ancient trails, evidence of life forms that move through the mud before vanishing into evolutionary obscurity. Perhaps labyrinths of rock carved by currents and quakes, forming natural cathedrals that dwarf anything built on land. The ocean has had billions of years to decorate these depths. Odds are, it hasn't kept things simple. But the most tantalizing discoveries, of course, will be the living ones. Imagine the moment when a submersible's headlights sweep across an organism unlike anything science has imagined, something with physiology designed entirely by pressure, darkness, and patience. Maybe a creature shaped like living geometry, moving with impossibly slow grace. Maybe something translucent, tentacled, or ribbon-like, pulsing softly in the water as though breathing in time with the planet itself. Or perhaps something surprisingly elegant, proof that evolution doesn't stop being creative just because sunlight checked out at 600 feet. We may discover entire communities thriving in hidden pockets, ecosystems fed not by sunlight or surface debris, but by chemical energy seeping from the crust. Sheltered worlds where species have evolved in near total isolation, continuing ancient lineages uninterrupted by surface catastrophes. Creatures that never needed eyes. Creatures that never knew color. Creatures that may outlive us without ever knowing we existed. Scientists also expect to uncover new biochemical strategies. Organisms whose enzymes function under crushing pressures. Creatures able to metabolize elements in ways we've never seen. Microbes that rewrite our understanding of where life can survive or where it can begin. These discoveries may influence medicine, energy, astrobiology, and climate science in ways we haven't yet imagined. The deep sea doesn't just hide mysteries, it hides potential. And beyond living things, there's the possibility of finding entirely new geological processes, strange mineral reactions, unusual volcanic structures, rare metals collecting quietly over millions of years, patterns in sediment that reveal the rhythms of Earth's history with more clarity than any surface rock. The trenches might hold records of past climates, extinct ecosystems, or ancient catastrophes written in the chemistry of the mud, chronicles we haven't yet learned to read. Yet amid all this scientific promise, the ocean will keep doing what it's always done, pretending it's not impressed. With every breakthrough, it will present 10 new questions. With every dive, it will show 1 new feature and hide 3 more. Even when we map every trench wall and sample every microbe, the ocean will still find ways to surprise us. It is too vast, too deep, too old, and too stubborn to give away all its secrets at once. But maybe that's part of the magic. Exploration isn't just about answers, it's about mystery. The hadal zone gives us a frontier untouched by casual discovery, a place where the unknown still stretches far beyond the beam of our brightest lamps. It gives us a place to wonder, a place to ask questions boldly, a place where imagination and science shake hands in the dark. So the cinematic ending of our journey isn't a tidy revelation. It's a wide shot, a submersible descending into the abyss, lights cutting thin paths through black water, the trench floor still hidden just beyond visibility. The ocean watches quietly, saying nothing, revealing nothing more than it chooses to. It doesn't need to brag. It knows exactly how much it's hiding. As our vehicle sinks deeper, the world above fades away. Pressure rises. The soundtrack becomes a hushed thrum of distant currents. And just when the darkness feels complete, the lights catch something, movement, shimmer, texture. Not a monster, not a treasure chest, just something new, something unexpected, something that reminds us we are visitors in a world that has existed for eons without us. This is the promise of the hadal zone, not certainty, but possibility. Not answers, but questions worth chasing. The deep ocean holds its cards close, its expression as unreadable as ever. And yet, we keep diving, keep listening, keep imagining, because somewhere in that silent, crushing darkness, extraordinary discoveries are waiting patiently for the moment when we finally look their way.